Professor Morris is senior professor with the Indian Institute of, earlier he was with the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. Right now he is with Goa Institute of Management. Welcome, Professor Morris. I have also with me Raghunathan, K. Raghunathan. He's with All India Manufacturers Organization, and he has been highlighting the travails and problems of MSMEs, and he will make a very important contribution to this discussion. And I also have with me Vivian Fernandez. He's a senior journalist and a columnist and a regular contributor to the Federal as well. Welcome, gentlemen. Now, all of you have heard the budget, and I would start with Professor Morris. One request I would make to you, Morris, that Professor, that we have a very lay audience. You may have to really break down this budget and explain it to them. Were you surprised, or you were kind of sure that this is the kind of budget, first year of Amrit Kal and the last budget of the current regime? Is that how it would be? This is how you imagined it would be?
Certainly not many surprises. It was quite usual, I would think. Okay.
Right. So he has continued to press pedals on capex. Is that a big one? Continuation for the third year in succession, I think. A big bump of 33%. And but how would you rate? The announcement in the budget is fine. Whether there has been enough capacity to absorb what has announced in the previous 2 years. We haven't yet seen the private investment crowding in yet. Do you think it will take some more time, or is it a correct economic, as far as economic is concerned, do you think it's a right path he has taken?
Okay. You want me to comment on this?
Yeah, please. Yes.
Okay. See, the way I would see it is that, yes, this rise in capital expenditure, which has been continuing from the previous years, is something positive. However, if you want to measure the impact of this capital expenditure on demand, see, I'm starting with the presumption that demand is flagging. Okay. And we need to keep up the demand. And in order to do that, the budget has to push. Now, how much push does the budget provide is the question. Now, if you value the capital expenditures are rising quite a bit. Okay. 26% or thereabouts. But if you look at the totality of expenditure, okay, the revenue expenditure minus the interest payments, because that's what the government is going to spend also, then that is barely rising by about 3.9%. Okay. So, which in nominal terms is well below the nominal GDP growth, which is around 11%, 10%, which is anticipated. So, that's not adequate. Now, if you multiply the capital expenditure by 2 for its impact, because the capital expenditure multipliers are known to be higher.
Right.
Even then, you see, the totality of what I would call the total effective expenditure is a mere, 11% versus 12.9% last year. Okay. So it's highly unlikely that the budget is going to give a big push to the demand side and hence to growth, because demand is what is constraining the economy today. Now, the second point is that, if you, let us say, take this argument further, where else can the demand come from? Okay. It could have come from a revival of private investment. Okay. But I don't see much going forward other than the PLI. I mean, many things like investment tax credit or, reduction in uncertainties for the private investment could have taken place. I think the biggest negative over the last several years has not, and I'm not just talking about COVID, have been the rising uncertainty for the private industry. And I would say right from 12-13 onwards, this has been going on with no let up to it. Okay. Latest data on GDP would show that the first estimates are always overestimates. Okay. The second estimates come down and the final estimates are even lower. Okay. Particularly when there is a positive growth. In the negative growth, it's the other way around, during the COVID years. And those are the only, 3 quarters or so. But what I'm going to say then is that, See, we may not achieve a growth of more than what we achieved today, this year. That means we closed the year 2023, my guess is with about 6.7% growth. It's highly unlikely we'll touch 7. And next year, we may just do the same at best, perhaps lower down, because the world economy is going to continue to be,
Right.
rather problematic. Okay. So no new measures on private investment other than PLI. PLI is extremely uncertainty causing as well as, giving some marginal support. The only safe thing which I see is for the electronics industry, where some inversion in the tariffs have been corrected. Okay.
Mhm.
And I think that's a very good measure, because we are an economy where the manufacturing sector has been killed for long years with inversions. Okay.
Mhm.
The big thing is that, if you really look at the thrust of the budget, it is on certain assumptions. Okay. That look, IT, digitization, setting up portals is equal to improved governance and so on and so forth. Okay. And that will bear results in terms of ease of doing business and efficiency. But the example of the financial sector, where, would show that actually this digitization and so on may have imposed huge regulatory burdens on the industry, particularly on share operators, brokers, and so on and so forth. So today, enormous amount of effort is made in terms of meeting the regulatory norms. And my sense is the portals and so on would only increase. It might give value much later. There's a massive reduction in subsidies. Okay. Massive. There's no 60,000 crores is provided for MNREGs, which is lower than what it was last year. But of course, the government has said that in case it's required, it will go.
No, but MNRGA, they always, this is the practice now. They initially allocate lower, later than midway, they increase it.
Sure, but the point is
even the CAG has pointed out that shouldn't be doing such things. Yeah, please go.
Okay, so one hopes that it will be elastic enough and it would be demand driven. But the positive parts of the expenditure increase are really on rail and road, particularly on rail. Okay, and I think that's very positive. Now, if you look, and then on energy, which I don't really see why this should be the case, except that certain new forms of energy are being promoted. So the scientific departments will get a big thrust. Transport, as I said, railways would be there. Development of Northeast, but that's a small item, so it doesn't really add to expenditures, but the Northeast would have it. The surprising thing is that there is a huge expenditure increase on energy. Railways is not surprising because of the new minister and his ability to pull through and really carry out reforms. This is money which is going to go the right way. Okay. Now, so this is what I would say in the initial round, that my focus is on growth, and I don't think the growth will revive anywhere above 7%. Okay, that is the feeling one gets. It won't get back to those really good 8.5% growth that we had during the early years.
I think in some ways it is also anticipated, because the buoyancy of tax, which happened based on lower tax base. So this year they anticipated 25% growth. For next year, I think even the revenue targets they have scaled down a bit.
That's right.
So I'll come back to you. Let me have the first round from Vivian. Hello, Vivian. How do you see this budget?
Really, I have not looked at the overall budget, though I stayed for the full speech of the finance minister, in which he made many references to Amrit Kal. Anyways, so what I like about the budget is that there is a big thrust on capital expenditure.
So one thing, Vivian, when you mention Amrit Kal, this made me feel that though we are calling it as an election year budget, more or less this government seemed to have decided they actually won the election.
In fact,
if you look at everything is very long term in its approach.
Exactly. And she was saying that she'll be able to achieve the fiscal deficit target of 4.5% in 2025-26. I mean, so obviously they are not planning for to sit in the opposition. So as I was saying, overall I like this budget because there is ample thrust on capital expenditure. I would have liked the fiscal deficit to be reduced by 0.8%. The finance minister has reduced it by 0.5%, which means that for the remaining 2 years, the reduction of 1.4% will have to happen. So she's left the heavy lifting to the remaining 2 years. in terms of the capital expenditure of 10 lakh crores, about 2.4 lakh crores are on the railways. And I see that the capital expenditure on the railways have been continually increasing. The budget, for example, this year, budget estimate is 2,92,000 crores. Last year, it was 2,55,000 crores. And the year before, it was 1,90,000 crores. So there has been a continuous increase in the expenditure on railways. And I think that is as it should be. Prime Minister Vajpayee had laid a lot of emphasis on road development. I had expected the Modi government to emphasize on railways, and that is happening. But but I'm not sure about the outcome, because the bottlenecks still remain. For example, the economic survey says that till November this year, the passengers traveling by the railways were about 400 crores, which is half of what it was pre-COVID. Similarly, in terms of freight carriage, there has not been a substantial increase. So while there's a lot of spending on doubling, electrification, investment in rolling stock and all that, I don't see, a reduction in the logistics cost or an improvement in the carrying capacity of the railways or an improvement in their finances as well. So I don't know what's happening, number one. The other aspect, of course, is where I look very keenly is on agriculture, where the finance minister has made a number of feel-good announcements, but I find that their overarching vision is lacking. Because in agriculture, what we needed was a thrust on climate-smart agricultural technologies. That is missing. Instead, we find that the finance minister has given a thrust on millets, and this is the International Year of Millets. She's also given a thrust on improving the productivity.
By the way, millets have been renamed.
Yeah, she has renamed as the Shri Anna, which is actually not an original thing to do, because Karnataka in 2016 had called them Siridhanya, which means rich grains. So,
but in Tamil Nadu, it is called Sirudhanyam, means small.
Okay. So, that trust is required and it also deals with the climate smart agriculture, because millets, after all, use less water. They are also socially useful, and they also are, plugged at the urban population, which is increasingly prone to lifestyle diseases. So on millets, I agree with the thrust, but I don't understand the thrust on improving the productivity of extra long staple fiber cotton, for example. This is Egyptian cotton, which we grow very little of, and there is no money that the finance minister allocated to back her talk. Similarly, there is a thrust on horticulture, which is as it should be. But overall on agriculture, I find that what we needed was more R&D for new age seeds, for agriculture, from less agriculture, because we have to now shift from the green revolution to the gene revolution. So I find that missing. I find a thrust on climate smart agriculture missing. So number of feel good announcements, but not an overarching vision.
But in agriculture, she has announced a few measures for more digital inclusion. Basically, information gathering, which will give crop prediction. Also, market.
There are a number of agri startups that are there in the digital space, but I don't think they have made much of a difference. It is quite possible that over a period of time, they might make a difference, just as in financial technologies. Digital has played a big role in making, in easing the payments, and that is because of the infrastructure that we had with the JAM, Trinity, Aadhaar, and things like that. So over a period of time, it might make a difference. I'm not saying that a thrust on digital agriculture was not required, but again, there is no money, no allocation made. For example, you have the agriculture accelerator fund, but no allocation has been made for it. So all these announcements are made. I also find a contradiction. On the one hand, this government has eased the regulations for gene editing last year. It has also approved the first genetically modified food crop, which is GM mustard. But in this budget, the Prime Minister is talking about training 1 crore farmers in natural farming. And natural farming is not compatible with sustainable intensification. It is land intensive, it is resource intensive.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I'll now quickly go to Mr. Raghunathan. Please, what's your opening remarks? You've been expecting with anticipation this budget, I'm sure.
Good evening and thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah, go on. Thank you.
Okay. I'm completely speaking from the perspective of micro and small entrepreneurs or self-employed or gig workers. From that standpoint of view, this budget was expected to be giving a lot of relief, but it has not given any relief. None of their needs have been touched. Let me explain what are those needs first, then it will be easier for us to understand. I'm talking about the people who are painfully struggling to create profitability. I'm talking about the people who have been confined to a house for more than 12 months in a 24 months period to save the people from COVID. I'm talking about the people who have no big resources to back up support. I'm talking about the people who have to work and earn. Today, 30-40% of these micro, small entrepreneurs have either perished or wound up. There are about another 20 to 30% of the people who don't know what to do, what else to do. And these are the kind of issues which we took it up with the finance minister and said, in the last 4 budgets of yours, you have addressed the needs of the people who are above all this, who are doing well or who could do well, who are running and how could you make you do better. Now you need to look at the people who need oxygen to survive and don't give them again a Horlicks. And this budget gives them again a Horlicks. They have become exhausted. Now let's talk about the money part of it. There are lots and lots of entrepreneurs who have no access to finance from the formal sector of banking. Because last 2 year performance is bad or CIBIL score is bad, they are not able to repay even the existing loan. They are not able to raise funds. No answers given. They need securities. So there is a gap between the policymakers and the implementers. No one to address this gap. The second aspect is the last 4 months we have increased the repo interest by over 2.5%. What we cited as a reason was the inflation rates. Now the inflation seems to have come into control. At least for the small scale and micro entrepreneurs, the interest rate could have been given as a concession for at least next 1 year. How do they make profit is what should have been the concern, because they are now working hard and earn for the government through the GST, earn for the government through the income tax, or tax comes only when they make profit. So earn for the suppliers, earn for the staff, earn for their overheads, which have increased by 30 to 40%, and finally left with only debt. So they are not willing to do this continuously. They are not able to do this continuously. We thought we could have addressed. There is no news. We talked about unemployment. There are about 22 crores of people who are employed in the informal sector, which is majorly given by the MSMEs. Now, we talked about EPFO data. I am in the board of EPFO. And the EPFO data is about 5.5 crores of members who are in the formal sector. We are talking about an informal sector people who are not under the radar of the EPFO, who are 4 times that. So we are not worried about them. We are adding about 80 lakhs of fresh graduates looking for jobs every year. We don't have an answer for them. So this does not solve anything. Next, the future, next year, is very, very unsure. The micro exporters are struggling without orders in Coimbatore area because the cotton prices have gone up, yarn prices have gone up, manpower problems. And they are not able to know what is to be done. Whereas we are talking about nothing about them. We are not talking about easing them. There are about 11.5 lakh crores is outstanding payable to MSMEs. We are not talking about that. We are not addressing that. We are only making statements saying that within 45 days, MSME payment must be cleared. Then we came out with a scheme which was never understood by any of the state government to push through. So we have a problem. And this problem is well known. But the problem is not addressed. So you talk about now, the only thing which is left out as talking is the income tax rebate. Now the income tax rebate, you saw her statement, 9 lakhs earner. It saves about 12,000 rupees if he opts for the new scheme. That's all. Now 12,000 on a 75,000 rupees earning guy a month, 1,000 rupees saving, will it stimulate demand? Crazy. And we all want to clap for it. We all want to appreciate it. We all want to talk about how the futuristic India will be. We all talk about a lot of good things we are talking about. But let me tell you, the data tells us what is happening in the last 2 years.
Sorry for interjection. One question, Mr. Raghunathan. The finance minister did announce this credit guarantee for MSME. She did say that, we are infusing another 9,000 crores by April 2023. And, it will create an additional collateral of 2 lakh. Are these...
The biggest, funniest statement. She should ask, first of all, herself. I have written a lot of articles in newspapers on the ECGLS scheme. It was 3 lakhs crore which was sanctioned during the COVID called the Emergency Credit Guarantee Scheme. Then it was extended by another 50,000 crore. Then it was extended by another 1.5 lakh crores. So it is now 5 lakh crore. It is now third year. The very word emergency is gone because you are going into the fourth year. The very word credit guarantee is gone because the eligibility criteria has not made 90% of the MSMEs to come and avail this. Now, even today, out of 5 lakh crore which is available with you, the sanctioned fund is 3.2 lakh crores. The availed dispersal from the bank is 2.7 lakh crores. So why is that people have got the sanction but not availing it? Think. The reason is the banks are not giving that money in the hands of the people. They are adjusting it for the past dues. They are adjusting it for regularization, passing the buck on the shoulders of the entrepreneur. They are taking additional security, collateral security, which is already extended. There is a gap between the cup and the lip. 1,000 times she has been briefed. But you don't want to change it. You only expanded the eligibility of people. Originally, what you are supposed to be for less than 5 crore people or 5 crore turnover or 20 crore turnover has now gone up to 250 crore turnover can avail. Earlier, which was only for MSME, even a professional can avail. This is what we have done. So what is the point of giving credit guarantee? Those who have not been eligible for that, where will they go? Is a question mark. That ECGLS scheme is available, and there was another scheme called Fund of Funds, yet to take off. There is another scheme called equity infusion in the entrepreneur, which is meant only for a private limited company having a potential to go limited, which is normally a medium scale companies. Entrepreneur driven companies, 3 people, 5 people, 10 people working micro entrepreneur, either the service provider. These fellows are left with nothing. Nothing. And nobody has a guts to tell her on the face in their office that this scheme is a waste.
Yeah, okay. I think Professor Morris would like to say something on this. Professor Morris, please go on. And I would, meanwhile, can I quickly welcome Dr. Pulla Rao Pentapati. He's an economist and a political commentator. And welcome.
Thank you.
I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you. Professor Sebastian, go on.
Just very briefly, this whole MSME question is going to be a very, very important question. Okay. What has happened is the employment collapse, which happened in the COVID, has not been made up. Okay. The unemployment figures are quite deceptive because the labor force participation has fallen. So if you look, the manufacturing broadly sector, which was largely MSME, fell by around 5.5 million in terms of employment. The recovery even today has been less than 4 million. So there's about 1.2 million, employment to be made up. The unemployment figures are obfuscating that. Now, the reasons are not just the credit availability. No, credit is one thing. The demand side for the MSMEs has collapsed for a variety of reasons. One is the arbitrage anymore in the labor market has gone. Okay. Between the unorganized and the organized labor markets. Second is the GST has created a situation where there's nowhere to hide. So if anyway everyone has to pay taxes at the same rate, okay, the advantage shifts back to the large. So the large will pick up, and when the large picks up, the employment intensity is going to be lower. Okay, and that will hurt the MSMEs. The other thing is that there is nothing positive in manufacturing in terms of lower interest rates, which Mr. Raghunathan mentioned. But this is not a matter for the budget; it's a matter for the central banker, and we need to distinguish between the two. So he's quite right that I don't see the budget compensating in any way for the existing negatives against MSMEs, and it's highly unlikely that anything would happen because it's on a secular decline. What they call formalization is because of tax, because of labor market changes, and also because I would think that the government is explicitly encouraging the large in a variety of ways which are not being seen or which are not being obvious. For instance, tax breaks were given on the income tax side for large. Now, between large and small, there is no great difference also. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I would quickly go to, Dr. Pullarao. You have heard the budget. I don't know whether you could read it because it's nowadays all digital. I don't know whether you could access that. But what do you make of the preliminary about the budget? What's your views on that?
See, one thing is, what I have heard from other shows participating and listening is everybody says, is this the budget which Mr. Narendra Modi, Prime Minister, says the world was looking for? 2 or 3 days ago, I believe, he made a statement that the world is looking at India and its budget. It seemed a little bit of a grand idea, but now looking at it, one would say that perhaps in his mind or in the government's mind, they want to develop infrastructure in a very big way, not only to encourage the domestic producers or manufacturers or domestic capital, perhaps there's a strategy to attract all those large companies in China or even in Taiwan which want to live and find new places. And India may be trying to set itself up. Right now we hear that Vietnam has cornered or Philippines has cornered, and some beginning has been made. The Apple company has come and set up outside Bangalore. They're looking at some other sites for some other products. And also the chip sector also is looking at India. Government is trying to make it come to India. Perhaps all this emphasis on infrastructure, the roads, the railways, the aerodromes, all of this is perhaps in a way they're trying to make India a manufacturing base to get away some of these industries from other countries, which may want to even move from Europe to be close to sources in Asia, or even leave China for very obvious reasons that China has become a very controversial spot. That kind of starts making sense now, because I always felt that this huge investment in infrastructure, lakhs of crores a year, and in addition to that, even the railway budget, last year 1.4 lakh crores, this year 2.4 lakh crores, never before in Indian history, as they say. So all of this, I used to feel it's too much. It's uncalibrated with our requirements. Yes, we need infrastructure. The minute you say we don't need infrastructure, one can't defend oneself. We need infrastructure, but should it not be in proportion to what the demand is, or immediate demand, or the near future demand? That I always felt was not in sync. They were just investing, and naturally industry and big business will welcome infrastructure investment by government. It helps their industries. It gives demand to cement, iron, steel, everything that they make, engineering sector. But now perhaps as we see that the huge exports of iPhones and other products, maybe India is, or the government strategy may be a little more well thought out than people like me have given credit. Those of us who are more weird, or at least always look that agriculture needs a little more, the rural areas need a little more because there are more people there, and all of that. So it does.
Okay, I'll take this as a preliminary comment. I'll come back to you. I have a few more questions for you. Before that, I think, Mr. Raghunathan, I think you want to leave. If you want to make any final remarks, you can. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I only wanted to quickly say only one thing, that everybody seems to be acknowledging the budget, but I wanted them to also know that there are areas which has not been addressed. It is not that it is not a bad budget, but it is a neglected budget. There is a section of people who are close to almost about 80 crores, as she said in her speech, 80 crores of people, if for 28 days were fed with food by the government at free of cost, we are talking 60% of the population were looking like a beggars from the government to be given with rice. We have never addressed them. After you give the rice, and if you stop giving the rice, then what will they do? Have they thought about it? We have come to that stage, or we talk only about the top 10% of the people and then create histories and create documents. The economist, so-called, needs to understand the pace.
I may not be ready by 11.
Okay.
Hello. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you.
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to highlight this as an opportunity as being the voice of the voiceless.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Rao, meanwhile, we are talking of, you're saying that, a lot of expenditures have been made. That, what isn't this a certain model of development which has been followed in Gujarat? Big infrastructure spend, and even don't economists prudently would agree that you make big investment in a manner that you ensure that it doesn't it does crowd in private investment, and you wait for a lag, and then the things start falling into place. Won't you look at it from that point of view?
To a certain extent, it's successful in one part of a country or one part of a unit where you're making these investments. It will not have a spread all over the country as large as India. Yes, they went overboard, did a lot for Gujarat. The government was in control from 2014. They invested a lot of money even now. If you're talking pre-2014, that's another category. But that works. At what cost? Should you invest 1 lakh crores? I mean, you're investing how many lakhs? For 10 lakh crores every year? A crore, lakhs. And just wait. What happens? You lose time, real time. And other sectors which require this aid very urgently, they don't get it. They're deprived. Well, this is a waiting time for the investments to mature, the investments to attract other factories, other economic activity. So there has to be a balance. That's what I feel.
Okay.
There has to be a balance.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Let me quickly go across to other guests. TK Arun is waiting. I also have Professor Deshpande. He's visiting professor at ISEC, Institute for Social and Economic Change. Professor Deshpande, welcome. Meanwhile, TK, if you can quickly give your opening remarks on the budget.
I think the budget has been well conceived, and it serves the purpose of catering to different sections of voters in the penultimate year before the next general elections. It caters to the need for an economic stimulus in the economy, which has to come given the low propensity of the private sector to invest. The government itself to come forward and provide the capital expenditure. Hopefully, the private sector investment will be crowded in through this. And I think the government has also done well to not try to overcorrect the fiscal deficit by keeping it at 5.9% of GDP. Overall, tax collections have been buoyant, and even for the next years, the tax projections have been fairly conservative. I think it's a decent budget.
Yeah, TK, I agree with you. See, in fact, many people thought that it will be an election year budget, but in my view, he would continue with this kind of expenditure, big expenditure on capex and all, as he did last year as well. Because in 2018 also, or even the budget immediately after COVID, he did not relent on big expenditure. But the question is, whether private investment has begun to come in. You haven't seen that yet happen. So do you think there will be more lag before you see those investments coming in? Because you don't see, the pumping in of big money has happened, but you haven't yet seen the private participation in a big way.
See, if you look at credit expansion, I think it might be kicking in. Credit has been growing of late, and if you look at the latest advanced estimates provided by the Central Statistics Office, the fixed capital formation as a proportion of GDP is now pegged at 29.2%, at both GDP and capital formation figures being at market prices. So that is quite positive. Actually, we needed this to be above 30% of GDP, probably 30, 33, 34%. While it hasn't reached there as yet, because it is still primarily the government, the fact that it has moved up from 27% to 29% over the last 2 years indicates that investment might be picking up. And another point which the chief economic advisor was at pains to stress yesterday in his press conference is that the bank balance sheets have been repaired. The banks are now in a position once again to start lending. Now, if the government can give them the assurance that a big loan will not be followed up with a visit by the CBI, I think the banks will actually start lending.
Right. But how much you think it will have an impact on, the private consumption, which actually fuels economy? It's 60% of that. I mean, would it result ultimately in the overall economy picking up?
I think so. So typically what happens when you invest is that the investment creates a multiplier effect through multiple rounds of investment and added consumption. So while the proportion to GDP might remain where it is, 60%, that doesn't depress the level of consumption in absolute terms or the growth impulse it provides. Let us remember that when China was growing at double digit, its consumption was barely 50% of GDP. I mean, they were actually saving quite a lot and investing nearly 50% of GDP. Their investment rate was nearly 50% of GDP, or saving was 50% of GDP, and investment was 44% of GDP, and they used to have current account surpluses of 6% of GDP. So, as a proportion of GDP is not what really counts. Is consumption really going up in absolute terms? And that is actually the case. And that will continue to happen if investment really materializes.
Yeah, okay. I'll come back to TK for a minute. Let me just welcome Professor Deshpande and ask him, welcome Professor Deshpande, what's your initial remarks on the budget?
You said that it is not a pre-election budget. You see, there is a skill in doing the budget. It is easily masked, not to look as if it is a pre-election budget, but it is a popular budget. Mr. Modi has very clearly stated that his vote bank is middle class. We have to focus on middle class. Sometime back, he said it in cabinet meeting. And there was a book which has come out from a friend of mine who is a journalist, Media, Middle Class and Modi. The entire thing is middle class. So what he had done is tried to focus, or what Finance Minister had done, tried to focus two components, namely the middle class by tax concessions, and second, as earlier speaker said, that there is a huge investment which is in the public works in anywhere. Now, I say that this pays rich dividends because it creates employment. One, it is a showcase. The moment there is a big Samruddhi Marg taken in Maharashtra, everyone knows that a Samruddhi Marg is going. It's a advertisement without putting in the newspapers or media that Modi is doing work. Now, therefore, these investments are something which is pre-election strategy. Let me get back to the economics of it, the public finance of it. On the account of public finance, I feel that the budget is excellent because the fiscal deficit has been brought down to 5.9%. Tax buoyancy is strong, which we are getting significant amount of like this year. We are tax revenue itself is 23.3.
Yeah.
23.3 lakh crores, which is much higher, 3 lakh crores higher than last year's revised estimate, which means that as far as revenue generation is concerned, it is fairly good. But despite the revenue generation, the investment, or despite the revenue generation, the kind of allocations which should have been done on certain things has not been sufficient enough. For example, the investment in public sector, what I was looking at, the investment in the public sector, PSUs, JVs, SPVs has increased 8,000 crores to 34,000 crores. But the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund, which was given 2,000 crores last year, was also 2,000 crores this year, which means that we have, on the investment front, what he is expecting is investment from the domestic investors. And who are these domestic investors? These are the people who had earlier kept their money elsewhere and bringing it in. I tell it in every public platform that the number of malls, the number of development projects, the high-rise buildings, suddenly from 91 onwards, or say 95 onwards, they started sprouting from nowhere. Where was this money? Where did it come from? And when you look at it, it doesn't come as foreign direct investment, but it comes from the very public. A huge 1 acre of Mantri Mall comes from Mantri, which is a builder of India. Where was that money? Was it taxed? Was it not taxed? Certainly, the money was there in India, and money is there in India. And we don't have to search for black money elsewhere. It is right here. Right here, and how it is taxed, nobody knows about it. But then this is getting into investment. This is getting into this. Coming to agriculture sector, yes, one scheme was given, the direct payment to the farmers. Fine. About 2.2 million farmers are given. About 2.2 million money is given to 11.4 crores of farmers. Fine. It's 6,000 rupees. But then, what is the rationale behind this 6,000? Should it be constant over years? In fact, when year-to-year growth in the investment in agriculture is concerned, working capital for agriculture is concerned, it increases by at least 7 to 8% every year. And this is thanks to the input markets, which has been growing at a rate which is more than double or triple, input prices going more than double or triple of long-term growth rates than the product prices. Certainly, the farmer fields or the cultivators. There is one very interesting thing. Who are these cultivators? Large number of them are the ones who find hardly anything for the investment. Small and marginal farmers form more than 80% of the total farm sector in India. Now, 6,000 to them for undertaking cultivation is something need to have been increased now. It's a good scheme. It's a good scheme. Certainly, it will help the farmer to buy.
No, I see what you're trying to say, but let's go back to an overall view of the budget. Are you trying to suggest that this is a popular budget?
There is
primarily aimed at. I think there are lots of caveats within that. When you say tax, sorry.
We use a rubbed off vocabulary. The rubbed off vocabulary is popular budget. It's not a popular budget because it doesn't seem to be that. And we are very happy with our vocabulary that call it a popular budget. No, it's not. It's a budget which is shrewd, which exactly does what it wants to do. But you can't call it popular budget because there are not freebies given in it.
Yeah. So even in the direct tax exemption, which is for the middle class, he is actually guiding towards a new tax regime, so which all the exemptions are gone.
Certainly.
So,
certainly, that is
that's
but
a bit more.
On the face of it, it shows that we are getting some benefit out of the direct taxation. Same thing true about in the agriculture. All over years, people have been talking about the millets and growth of millets. About 2-3 paragraphs, she spoke about Shri Dhanya. And what is the resultant of it? Establishment of a research center at Hyderabad, Institute for Millets. Now, are we not having sufficient number of ICAR institutions which are doing research and development in millets? We have, but they are not taking it to the farm, and nobody wants to take it to the farm because culturally, over generations, millets have been degraded as not the preferred grain for the high class. Have you seen anywhere in any marriage or even Devegowda doesn't use ragi in the marriage hall. He uses only wheat chapati or rice. He speaks about ragi, but he cannot use ragi when the marriage feast has to be given. No ragi mudde is served. The speaking is nice, but then doing is difficult.
Right. Thank you. Let me quickly welcome Professor Ramakumar. He's from TISS, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Welcome, Ramakumar. What's your opening remark? Quickly, let's go through that. Yeah.
Sorry, this is the budget where there's some interesting tricks at play, in my view, and keeping cards close to the chest and choosing to play them at the right time as the year passes by. Look at the following numbers from the fiscal policy framework. Your fiscal deficit is going to fall from about 6.4% to 5.9%. That's about 0.5% of the GDP. That's going to be a huge fall. And it's expected to fall to 4% in 2 years. So
4.5.
4.5% in 2 years. But what is happening to your gross tax revenue? The gross tax revenue is standing solid at 11.1% of the GDP this year as well as the next year. And your non-tax revenue is also going to stand solid at 1% of the GDP this year and next year. So essentially, if you keep GDP as the bench as a kind of a benchmark and calculate rest as a percentage of it, you're going to see a sharp fall of expenditures as a share of the GDP. You don't have GDP numbers of 23-24 in the budget, but I did some back of the envelope calculations backwards, and I found that the total expenditure to GDP ratio is going to fall from somewhere around 15.3% in the current year to about 14.7 to 14.8% next year. So that's going to be I heard somebody saying it's likely to be a expansionary budget and so on. It's not. It's actually a contractionary budget if you look at total expenditure by GDP ratio. By standards of fiscal consolidation, that may be justifiable, but by other standards, it may not be justifiable. That's one. Now that you have done this, it clearly shows that your expenditure must fall. Now, your expenditure must fall in some places, but then you cannot announce new schemes. If you want to announce new schemes, you need to create the fiscal space for those new schemes. How have you done that? You have done a clever thing in subsidies. You have cut your subsidies, allocated subsidies, from 5.2 lakh crore rupees to about 3.75 lakh crore rupees, which is actually a fall of 1.5 lakh crore rupees. Now, this creates a fiscal space for her to create new schemes, to announce new schemes. But why is it meaningless? It is meaningless because she has cut petroleum subsidies from 9,000 crore to 2,200 crore. She has cut fertilizer subsidy from 2.3 lakh crore to 1.7 lakh crore. Is this going to be viable? The government will have to raise fertilizer subsidy and petroleum subsidy as the year goes by, which means that all the new announcements that are made are meaningless, or expenditure will have to be cut in a whole range of schemes for which allocation has currently been made. So so she's created a fiscal space artificially and made a slew of announcements which mean nothing if these subsidies have to be reinstated.
Yeah. Have you also looked at expenditure for education and health? I think again they're very meager.
Very meager. That's so. What exactly she has done?
3.8%. Yeah.
She has kept some new announcements in place for which there are some expenditures which are allocated, and for a range of other schemes, very minor 30 crore, 40 crore kind of increases have been made in a range of schemes, which essentially makes it look like the total expenditure has increased. But if you look at total expenditure and the configuration of it, as I mentioned it, it has not.
Okay, Professor Ramkumar, that's I would like to bring TK here. I think he's raising his hand. Yeah, TK, go ahead.
I think Ramkumar made a very pertinent point. But what has to be borne in mind is that the Narendra Modi government's budget prior to the pandemic had constantly shrunk to all the way to less than 13% of GDP. In the 2020-21 budget was 16% of GDP. The 2022-23 total expenditure was 15.3% of GDP. And the proposed 23-24 budget, the total expenditure is actually 14.9% of GDP. Actually, the budget actually gives the GDP number as a footnote on the first page of that. Yeah. So it is still 15% of GDP, while as a proportion of GDP is 1 percentage point lower than what it was in 2 years ago. By traditional Indian budgetary standards, it is still a large budget. See, we are a country with a total tax collection of 17% of GDP, the states and the center combined. That's our fiscal capacity and fiscal capability. Globally, of course, France would spend more than 50% of GDP going through the government because they have that kind of tax collections. The average tax collection in the OECD is 34% of GDP. We are placed exactly half that. So there is a limit to how much we can spend without straining our credibility as a borrower on the market. So, but you're absolutely right. As a proportion of GDP, the budget will shrink in the next year. Now, what is remarkable is that the tax collections are budgeted to go up by 10.5%, exactly the same proportion as the GDP growth rate. So they're not anticipating any rise in tax collections as a proportion of GDP. However, indirect tax collections, which are actually they fall marginally lower than other taxes, 10.4% of GDP. It will be the budget will be rather than 10.5 in the case of direct taxes, which is not so bad. Now, the big thing is the capital expenditure. Now, it might not be fully from the budget, although they have said that they might actually expect to supplement what is budgeted with the monetization of the monetization pipeline they have indicated. They have identified a number of toll roads and other assets which they hope they can monetize, and that money will come in. Some, of course, they will come through the budget. In the case of a subsidiary of some PSU, it may not come to the budget; it will be directly monetized. So, that really is speaking is the measure that will have an impact on the economy's growth dynamic. That is more an execution game than a budget outlay game. It's not really within the hands of the government. So right. I think so. The budget numbers, to my mind, look reasonable. India always had 15% of GDP during Pranab Mukherjee's expansionary budget by raising the fiscal deficit.
Yeah, but so, TK, isn't that the finance minister has kind of the revenue projection itself has been slightly lower this time as compared to what it was, because on a low base, I think nominal GDP and also the revenue itself has grown very well this year. Yeah. But it may not happen next year because of the headwinds which you may face from what is happening. Geopolitical situation, exports may go down. There is a recessionary fear abroad, and all those things are coming in. So they may not expect the same kind of revenue next year. So in that sense, are you sure that they'll be able to meet this target? Because from the advantage they have taken this year, they may have been able to reduce the fiscal deficit. They may say that we are bringing to 5.9 and all, but is it feasible next year? Because the revenues may not be of the same order.
So there are two factors here. One is that they have kept some cushion as far as the assumed growth number. The economic survey said we'll have a real growth of 6.5%. And the inflation is supposed to be 5.8% according to the RBI. Which means we'll have how much? Okay, 12.3% of nominal growth. Whereas you are assuming only 10.5% growth.
Okay.
So there is a cushion in how much the economy will grow and how much will tax buoyancy be in real terms. Second, this is contingent on the economy actually growing on the strength of investments. So while last year we were merely announcing investments, this year we might materialize investment. See, you will find that companies like JSW is going into cement, into paints, which are all some kind of an indication. A traditional steelmaker venturing into paints is an indication they expect a lot of construction activity, real estate development, housing, etc. to take place, or office buildings to be materialized. All the concessions you are given for data centers to be built in India is an indication of a lot of construction activity materializing. The green hydrogen subsidies, Adani and Ambani will be able to avail of them only if they actually invest in green hydrogen facilities. So I would think that these investments would take place this year.
Yeah, Professor Ramakumar, obviously your formulation on expenditure itself is shrinking is very valid. But there's another point I'm tempted to ask you. You see, in the agriculture sector, they have announced some kind of a digital intervention, which means, they are even saying that, there are a few schemes which have been announced, and they're probably trying to create a new digital ecosystem where even price discovery may happen. Do you think it will help the farmers, especially in the case of where MSP and all those things, mandis, what happened in 2010? Following that, will it help the farmers in some way, at least, that they're able to find, if the data is there, they'll be able to discover price?
Well, the effort to use data for better price discovery is not new in agriculture. We have had a lot of experiments with futures markets in the past. We have had ENAM coming in fairly early enough. What we are now seeing is a next stage of it. Now what we are seeing is building of platforms like AgriStack, which essentially build different informations in one platform and make it available to people at a value. For example, you have the land revenue records are being modernized, and every land plot will get a kind of a unique number like the Aadhaar number. And then you basically are trying to link fertilizer subsidies, extension information, etc., all into that platform, so that it essentially looks like a platform which delivers not just information, but also goods and other services. That is the effort. Now, it's not a new effort. AgriStack has a long history. But basically, the key drawback in the implementation of such a thing is you do not have modernized or updated land records in the country. As long as you do not have updated or modernized land records in the country, any such building of a database with the land records as the primary foundation of it will be a non-starter. But there are other problems with it, which we don't have to speak about it immediately. There are questions of privacy and data protection, etc., concerns which have been raised with respect to such schemes for a long time, which are alive there, and which we need to discuss at a later point. But so digital platforms have been on for a while. This probably is a continuation of that, and but I see structural constraints to the realization of such an enterprise in the near future.
Okay. One more question to you, TK. I think probably TK said you want to go, he'll stay. Just one question quickly to you, TK, is 2 points Ramakumar made, Professor Ramakumar, is about the cut in subsidy, both fertilizer and fuel. You see, both the things are very much dependent on externalities. Basically, a lot of urea, 90%, I think we use. It's a lot of imported component in it, and the price have really gone up after the Ukraine and whatever geopolitical situation. The other is also the petroleum. Basically, we are lucky now that it's somewhere 80 per barrel right now. The assumptions have been made on the basis of all this. Even he's right in saying that these things may go up. So, how about these assumptions?
Yeah.
And also the external sector, obviously we haven't even spoken much about external sector, what might happen.
Yeah. So if the world economy grows, then that will be a boost to our growth. The exports will grow, and that will add impetus to all the overall growth dynamics. At the same time, if the world economy slows down, then various commodity prices will actually moderate, and that is not bad for India. Oil prices will come down, and other metal and raw material prices will come down. And in the case of fertilizer, last year was exceptional because of the war in Ukraine. The Soviet Union, its successor state, Russia and Ukraine, these are both large exporters of fertilizers and fertilizer inputs. Those supplies got disrupted. This year, we expect the supplies to be more or less normalized. And India can probably import fertilizer from Russia even if the war continues. Hopefully, the war should also conclude before very long. I think these are the considerations in cutting the fertilizer subsidy.
Right.
I think they might even, they change the food subsidy structure. While you are giving free food, you have done away with some certain sections of food security subsidies. They might make a saving there also. But I think the primary saving on petroleum and fertilizer subsidy is on the assumption that prices will stay low.
Right. Now, let me quickly welcome Praveen Chakravarti. He's a political economist and chairman of Data Analytic Center of the Congress Party. Welcome, Praveen. Praveen, can you hear me?
Hear me?
Yeah. So go on.
Yeah.
What's your opening remark? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you wanted the opening remark. Now,
yes. What do you make of the budget? You must have heard the finance minister.
Sure. See, I think the big story in the budget seems to be one of capital expenditure, as you would know. But so there's a big bet on capital expenditure. Now, economists will kind of tell you that capital expenditure can translate into real expenditure and benefit the economy only if there is an output cap and a slack in the economy. Because we have to understand the scale of expansion of capital expenditure. I mean, I think just a few years ago we were at about 3 lakh crores in capital expenditure. So to say that we can triple it in a matter of 4 or 5 years. I'm not saying it's impossible, it's possible, but that is a big bet. The second is what it also conveys, the reason why the government is forced to do all the heavy lifting is because the government seems to be the only batsman that is playing in the Indian economy today. The private sector is unable to. I mean, it's very obvious that the private sector investment is not taken off. Because of the global uncertainty, we can't export our way out of the economic misery or export our way to growth. So and obviously private consumption is also lagging. So that really leaves only the government as a key player. Now that's quite ironic for a party and a prime minister that came to power promising minimum government. But that aside, if the government has to spend and have a 45% increase or a 40% increase in capital expenditure in 1 year, where are they getting this money from? And it seems to be that very clearly there's only one area where they seem to have cut on the expenditure side, which is in Narega. And that's also deeply problematic, and I'll explain why. But other than that, the expenditure profile seems to be very similar, except for a big cut in Narega expenditure. And they've also committed to a fiscal deficit, lowering a fiscal deficit to 5.9%. And they're nominal growth projection seems to be 10.5% compared to 15% this year. So I'm a bit confused as to what is the government kind of betting on here, because to say that I will spend all this extra money, but I will have a conservative GDP growth, and hence, and I will not be able to cut that much of my expenditure. I think there's something missing here, because even on Narega, the empirical fact is there has not been a single year where the government has not exceeded its Narega budget estimate. Forget the pandemic, I'm talking even before the pandemic. And yesterday's economic survey told us that there are 7 crore families that still are asking for Narega work this year. Mind you, this 7 crore is compared to, you can compare it to about 5.8 crores before the pandemic. So we're way above pandemic levels, even in Narega demand. So I'm a little confused about how the government's trying to limit Narega expenditure to 60,000 crores, because if people are demanding, you cannot say no to them. By law, it's a demand-based program. So if expenditure is going to overshoot the budget, nominal GDP is only going to be 10.5%, which means tax revenues, a buoyancy of 1 is an assumption there, which also is optimistic. Then how can fiscal deficit be down, or how can you spend 40% more in capital expenditure? So something is amiss here.
Okay. So I would ask you a political question here, if you can. So obviously, it is not a normal budget in the sense that one could call it populist in the way we have seen in the past, where hundreds of announcements made targeting each and every section. There are nuggets which are couched within the budget. For instance, relief to middle class, relief to also pressing on with capital expenditure. Fiscal situation is also going to be very good. I mean, the real challenge here would be how he is able to sell the budget. I'm sure this budget, he can take it to people during election, and he will be able to sell it very well, because you can see the indications of that in the budget as well. That economists all are going to welcome professional economists, because stock market has also already welcomed. Overall, it's a good thing that you are actually putting a lot of money to expand capital expenditure. You're not doing wasteful expenditure. You're cutting subsidies. All that sounds very well. So how are you going to counter that?
No. First, I don't belong to the school of thought that a budget kind of actually matters electorally anymore. I mean, I think I don't quite subscribe to that theory. The second is, I actually do agree that the capital expenditure is good quality expenditure. I agree that if we are able to pull it off, it is good quality expenditure. Now, to me, the budget speech actually sounded very much like an election speech, actually. Some this scheme here and that scheme here, and this for tribals and that for women, and almost like tokenism in some sense, right? But so when I made my opening comment, I actually made it more as a professional economist than as a politician, active politician. But and that's because I'm not so sure, people are going to vote in the 2024 elections in May, or even if it's earlier, based on what they have promised in this budget. I think for that, on economic matters, when it comes to voting, I think it is very, very clear that inflation and jobs are the two, and probably the only two issues that matter electorally. Now, you will notice that there was actually no mention of either of the two words in the budget speech.
Yeah, but sorry to interrupt you, but I would take a quick last question, perhaps from TK. Perhaps he wants to leave. TK, Arun, you tell me. You see, this government is always in an election mode all through the year, and they are each and every opportunity they're able to convert into some kind of a political statement. I'm sure even this budget would be used very well, because ultimately it's the perception you're able to create. I do agree with Praveen that in the past you may not have been able to use budget as a tool for even electoral gains, but this government actually is very good at, for instance, now India people actually consider the GDP is a very good thing. The growth of GDP, they all know. They feel that GDP, and they depend on this only indicator. If this indicator is good, the country is doing good. So they have forgotten price rise or inflation or those kind of things. They now say no. Look, we are now 3. Now our GDP is in the global ranking we are number 3. Maybe soon we'll be number 1 also. So in this, what would be your final take on this? How much you think it's going to help this government? Because after all, this is going to be an election year. There are elections to 9 assemblies, and then there are finally general elections.
I agree with Praveen that the budget is not really meant to win elections. The budget caters to a certain section of people who pay taxes, their income taxes. So if you give them some tax breaks, it'll make them happy. Some even a much smaller subsection of the taxpayers who are economists, who bother about the size of the fiscal deficit and things like that, you throw them good numbers, they'll feel happy. But the mass of the people are worried about other things, like jobs or inflation. And of course, they are happy that India is being projected as the world's number 3 economy in terms of size. But, this is a government that believes in programs. It has very little sense of policy and very little sense of macroeconomic policies. It throws programs at the voters left, right, and center all through the year. So this budget also launches new programs, Mishti. There are so many other things, acronyms that are now created. The number of acronyms that has been generated by the Modi government since 2014, if you put one of your reporters to compile that with the number of program acronyms before this, I'm sure it will be quite revealing.
Actually, I think Akar Patel has written an entire book on just the acronyms.
Okay. So that is the style of campaigning. So that they will do. But the first paragraph of the budget says it caters to the needs of the poor, the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, the other backward castes, women. The only section it leaves out and loudly leaves out are the minorities. But of course, the economy grows as a whole. They will also benefit, and they have been benefiting from the government schemes, etc. So the budget does cater to different sectoral interests that the government is bothered about. And the government always likes to make tall claims about how it is benefiting people. And mind you, the drinking water from the tap scheme, Nal Se Jal, that is fully funded. And that has been implemented fairly well. Haryana, 100% households have water connections. Telangana has water connections. Gujarat has water connections. Some districts of Orissa have provided clean drinking water from the tap in at least one district, and is extending to other districts. So these are things that will actually make a tangible difference to voter behavior, and that is being fully funded. So it is be wrong to say that this budget doesn't have an eye on elections. Of course it has, in throwing up new schemes, in fully funding the programs that will actually make a difference. And if it becomes necessary, they will let the fiscal deficit slip, and that will be claimed as a concession to the needs of the people, and we will actually meet that. After all, how many people are really bothered about the fiscal deficit among voters? Some rating agencies, some
Right.
public finance experts will be bothered. The rest of the people don't bother.
Right. Thank you, TK.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Thank you. Bye. I'll quickly go to Professor Ramakumar. There are 2 issues here I would like you to address in the budget. One is the CapEx. Praveen also raised the issue. Basically, he's raising a question about absorption. It's very well to make an announcement as one. We are still waiting for private investment to crowd in. But of course, TK has a different take on this. The real question here is the flagship of that is this PLA scheme. I mean, have they? I didn't really see that. Have they expanded that, or have they given any report on that? Because I didn't hear in the budget speech.
No, I don't think there is a real expansion of the PLI scheme in that sense. But what I quickly understand from the budget document is that there's going to be this increase in capital expenditure. What's there in the budget, which may or may not be realized. I'm just saying what is there as per the allocations. A part of it is going to railways. A part of it is going to roads and other infrastructure. A large part of the increase is being absorbed by these two sectors. But whether money will actually be forthcoming for this, suppose that's exactly what I was saying in the beginning, that if fertilizer prices rise and more money is required to meet that subsidy, or if food subsidy is required more, or if petroleum subsidy or fertilizer subsidy is required more, the cut will fall on something like capital expenditure. So you are unlikely to go beyond 7.5 to 8 lakh crore if that happens. Now, a lot of cut is likely to happen in revenue expenditure also, because the government has that fungibility at hand. So a lot of schemes, if you see over the years, some schemes get a very drastic cut in a particular year. And that's exactly, that's done precisely to save that money and puts to some other emergency purpose. So my broader point is there is a discussion that we need to have on the integrity of the budget, or the integrity of the budget numbers. Is that integrity being compromised by ad hoc allocations, or not giving full information to the public in the budget itself and holding back information to do something very different later? For example, elections are coming next year, but then we are going to see an interim budget in the beginning of 2024, and that interim budget, trust me, is going to be a big one, and a lot of things that they have held back this year are going to be carpet bombed on the public in the 24 interim budget, which is going to be timed for the election. So I'm not very sure whether budgets matter for elections or not, but I do think that the interim, tell me the Congress party did not win the 2009 elections on the back of the loan waiver scheme announced in the budget previous year. It did. It did benefit from it. So it's not that it doesn't help, it does help. There's going to be an interim budget, and that's going to be the election budget, in my view.
Right. Now, quickly, I think we have our colleague Giri also joining in. Giri Prakash, can you hear me? Okay. Meanwhile, Praveen, there is one more question to you about the lot of emphasis on two issues here: green technology, and I mean, some of them was really good if it happens, because the carbon footprint, we need to reduce that. We are given certain commitment of attaining certain targets in global forums that we have to achieve. So this seems to be this budget seems to be peppered with a lot of such announcements. Could you really look at that? Because that's, you see, what has really happened is, whether it is agriculture or industry or other activities, industrial activities or economic activity, there's a lot of natural resources which have been severely damaged, and one expects a certain repair. And these are the measures which are necessary now. Do you think this budget is addressing that in a constructive way?
Yes, see, one is the entire aspect of climate and green energy. But pardon my cynicism here, I don't think it's any coincidence that Adani announced plans for hydrogen in July 2022, and there was a hydrogen allocation of 19,500 crores in today's budget. Now, similarly, I don't think Reliance bought Lithium Works factory in China and another factory in the UK last year, and to manufacture lithium-ion batteries. And the finance minister announced customs duty reduction for lithium-ion batteries. Now, still, the transition to green energy is welcome. I think it's also, I do agree, it's also an opportunity for India to actually enter into some new industrial activity that can actually be productive for the economy. But if it continues to keep getting captured by a few, I wonder what it means for the broader economy. And so green or blue, it doesn't matter if it's only going to be captured by a few people.
Right. Professor Ramakumar, one more question about exports. See, this year, obviously, one also expects probably a certain slowdown, because whatever impact you expect from the global headwinds, it is going to affect this aspect as well. It's one thing which is being expected, and they have fine-tuned certain custom duties, and especially extended some benefits to the electronic sector, and of course mobile phones. They expect that India is probably number 2 or number 3. I think they want to reach number 1 position, or I don't know. There have been a lot of such things given. Do you think that this budget in some way is going to help us keep our exports up? Basically, the external sector, which is exports, are very crucial.
There has been some tinkering of tariffs and other taxes, but I do not think that would be adequate to create an export-oriented growth path in any form. An export-oriented growth path is a far more serious issue, in the sense that you need a lot of reforms in production to begin with, which will end up through the value chain, link up into the export story. I don't think that kind of thinking is present in the budget. What they have done is some tinkering. It's quite possible that industry or associations have represented on specific exemptions or reductions in tariffs, and the government may have agreed to a few of them, and they might have announced it with a lot of fanfare. For example, for example, look at agriculture. Agricultural exports have risen. Now, is it because of any innate strength in our agricultural system that agricultural exports have risen? Hardly. Our agricultural exports were not doing well till the pandemic year. And when pandemic began, there was a change in the global stocking strategies of the major importing nations of food. India could export a lot of rice to the eastern part of the world and a lot of wheat to the African western part of the world. And we could essentially make use of that gap or a vacuum that was created during the pandemic and capture a bit of the export market. Beyond that, is there an increase in the income of the farmer, or is there an export-oriented path in agriculture which is going to come to which is going to be there in the next 1 or 2 years? No, that's not the story that we see. So similarly in industry as well, I do see some changes, but I do see them only as tinkerings, not in the form of a strategic reform to create an export-oriented growth paths.
Right. Praveen, can you make your final comments on the budget?
Sure.
How do you rate this budget? I'm not giving you a scale. I leave it to you.
No, I don't want to be one of the CII types to rate a budget.
Yeah, I know.
No, see, I mean, I think to be fair, like I said, the directional shift to capital expenditure is welcome, in the sense of the quality of expenditure going up. But for that to be funded through a cut in programs for NREGA is actually very ominous, because I think if nothing else, we are dealing, and not just India, all over the world, but certainly in India, I think it's no secret that the gap between the top 5%, 10%, and the bottom 75% is just expanding more and more. And it is these sorts of shifts that exacerbate this gap. Because I will also give you another data point, which has not been talked about. when the government raises taxes and tax revenue, collects tax revenues, in 2009-10, out of every 100 rupees in tax revenues that the government of India collected, 45 rupees came from corporates and about 25 from what I would call Aam Aadmi, which is GST and indirect taxes and all of that. Today, it's exactly the reverse. It's exactly the reverse. So I think it's these sorts of shifts that I watch for in budgets that can have long-lasting impact. And I really worry that the shift to capital expenditure is coming from at the cost of programs like NREGA, which I do not think is advisable and is good for India in the long run, because our goal actually should be to minimize NREGA demand. I'm not saying we should encourage people to go get NREGA, but in fact, if you ask me what should be the one labor market goal or economic goal that we should have, objective, to minimize NREGA demand, because people will not demand NREGA work if they have other opportunities and better opportunities. And unfortunately, that is not the case, but that directional shift is problematic for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Quickly, thank you, Praveen. One final question to you, Ramakumar, Professor. Do you see this as some kind of Gujarat model we are seeing reenacting, where you make big announcement, you really spend big, you really spend on infrastructure like rail, road, but then leave out lot of rural development which you need to do, creating small roads in rural hinterland, trying to help a small farmer by trying to create some kind of a market system for him, do some kind of an aggregation for him. I mean, those kinds of things which require less flashy but a lot more work, but really help raise the incomes of those who are really on the lower strata.
No, that's a very good question, but that requires a discussion which will transcend the boundaries of the union budget per se, because a lot of it happens in state budgets also. The problem here has been, if you look at the fiscal deficit numbers of the central government, we see 6.4%, 5.9%, etc. But the question that we need to ask is what is allowed for the states? Now, the states are allowed just 3.5% of their GSDP in terms of their fiscal deficit, of which 0.5% is contingent on power sector reforms. So if you don't decide to do that, you get only 3% of fiscal space. Now, what kind of change can come in rural, local? Because a lot of money is spent through panchayats, a lot of money is spent through local governments and so on, which is the ambit of the state governments and their finances. So there is a squeezing of the finances at the state government level, which needs to come into the discussion to answer your question. The second part of the question that...
sorry, yeah, go on, yeah.
No, go ahead, sure.
No, I quickly wanted to ask, did you also see the grants in aid which has been transferred to which will go as a part of the capital expense to the states? I think, did you see that? Was the allocation good enough for... it was an old scheme which had a 10,000 crore allocation, which was increased to 1 lakh crore allocation last year. We still don't have the numbers of how much has been given to states and what are the purposes for which it has been put. But nevertheless, the allocation has been increased to 1,30,000 crore this year. So we have 1 lakh, and that's part of your 10 lakh crore capital expenditure. That increase of 7.5 lakh crore to 10 lakh crore subsumes this increase of 30,000 crore from 1 lakh crore to 1,30,000 crore in under this particular scheme. So what I'm saying is, to answer your question, we need to take, because 85% of the social sector expenditure in India is undertaken by states, not the center. Right? And that means the elephant in the room is the state governments, and we don't discuss that when we put all the highlight of the finance minister at the center. That is the key issue. Second, even in basic infrastructure schemes, a lot of announcements are made with fanfare. I will give you the example of Agricultural Infrastructure Fund, AIF, for which 500 crore was allocated last year. But actual expenditure, revised estimates show, is only 150 crore. Yeah.
This year, again, 500 crore has been allocated. Now, what is going to be the actual allocation next year? We don't know. It will depend on the budget mathematics and the integrity of the budget numbers, as we discussed earlier. So a lot of announcements are made with a lot of look at other announcements in this budget itself. There's an announcement on PM Pranam. I spent 1 hour looking for where the hell that money is going to come from. I couldn't find that word Pranam anywhere in the budget. And my computer had at least 150 control Fs in every budget document. I just couldn't find PM Pranam. Then I found out that it's stuck inside some other scheme. So there's no way to know how much money has been actually allocated under PM Pranam. Then there is something called Gobardhan. I first thought it was Govardhan. Then figured out it's Gobardhan, and then found out that it's actually under Swachh Bharat Mission Rural, which is under the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation. You just have to go and look for it and then find it out, right? So a lot of fragmentation of expenditures are there, very little, without much planning. Some allocation has been made. There is no clarity on what kind of outputs or outcomes are going to be forthcoming from these fragmented allocations. So a lot of rethinking must go into how a budget is planned as well. And that's where we miss the planning commission.
Right. I take it as your final comment. Actually, there's a lot more question I would like, but then we are running completely out of time. The next session has begun. I have my colleague Neelu waiting to get into the room. Thank you, Ramakumar. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Srinivas. Pleasure. Bye-bye.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more interesting updates.